On today's Sick Career podcast, I'm having a Googler, a former colleague of mine, Jenny Wood. She is a phenomenal woman. She has started a program within Google called Own Your Career, and she's a strong believer of taking proactive control of your career, something that's near and dear to my heart. So I think you're really going to enjoy this interview. You'll also hear about her new book coming out, and you'll learn to ask for things because you don't get what you don't ask for. So enjoy this episode with Jenny. And don't forget that if you are looking for any support with your career, whether it is landing a great job, getting more interviews, earning more money, or accelerating your career, go to kademacareers.com and we have solutions to help you get the job, help you hit the ground running, and then help you accelerate your career for the long term and build up generational wealth. So enjoy this talk between Jenny and I and own your career. Welcome to another episode of the Sick Career Podcast. On today's episode, I'm very happy to have a Googler on. I spent 5.5 years of my career at Google, and our guest today, Jenny Wood, overlapped with me there. We know so many people in common, but I don't think our paths crossed, or I'm sure we might have been in a Google Doc together or something like that. But I'm really excited to have her on, and she's been a Googler for almost 17 years now. And with that, I'm going to introduce Jenny. Jenny, tell the Sick Career audience a little bit about you and who you are.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Alan. We overlap in a Google Doc somewhere in the ether. So I'm Jenny. I have been a Google leader. I've been at Google for, like you said, about 17 years. I'm also a mom of 2 little kids, ages 5 and 7. And I work in an operations team in my core job, but I also have this passion project I started at Google called Own Your Career, helping people increase their impact and influence in their current role and or land their next role. And then for fun, I'm writing a book outside of work.
Oh, I was thinking about writing a book, and I thought that was not fun at all. So I'm looking for a ghostwriter myself. That does not sound fun.
You know, it's hard. It's hard work, but I guess I always find that hard work and fun can go hand in hand. Sometimes I think challenge and reward certainly go hand in hand for me.
Yeah, awesome. So let's talk about the Own Your Career program. That's a mantra that I often say, and it's something that I think is an amazing part of Google's culture. So I had lots of fond years at Google, and I thought more so than any company, they really probably put the most resources and care into people's careers and also empowered people to kind of innovate. And I don't know if this is a 20% project of yours or something like that, but just talk a little bit about the Own Your Career program that you're involved with or launched.
You nailed it. Google is a magical place in that we have our core jobs there, but we're given this not just freedom, but really invitation to engage in something called a 20% project. And that 20% project is something that still benefits the company in some way in terms of innovation or creativity or forward thinking. Sometimes it ends up being stuff I do in the evenings and on the weekends. I still have a really, really full-time executive leadership role there. But the fact that Google not just allows, but encourages our creativity, our innovation to do these things that matter to us and to the rest of the company is a gift that I think is pretty rare to find. So now, does everybody take advantage of this gift? No. But I saw an opportunity where I thought I could help people. And this whole Own Your Career program was based off of me trying to get from a sales role in New York City to a technical role in Boulder when I was already more senior in my position at Google. So there weren't a lot of jobs. And I basically, in a 6-month internal job search at Google, wrote down, let's call it 12 to 15 bullets on a piece of paper, simply for future Jenny to reference the next time I wanted to find my next gig at Google. And then a lot of people happened to come to me for mentorship or for guidance. And I'd say, okay, well, before we meet, and of course, I'm happy to meet, here, read this doc. It's got 15 of the tips that helped me land this role. And so ultimately, that job search was successful. And I did land a really cool role in Boulder on this technical team. And so I would just give this sheet to people to read before they set up time with me, figured that would make our conversation even more effective use of their time. And then, surprisingly to me, the doc started getting shared without my knowledge.
Mm.
And then it started getting shared a lot. And then I put a little bit of better design behind it with someone who helped me out who has really great design skills. And then it kind of turned into this program, the Women at organization, which is the Google-wide women's organization. Say, hey, could you teach your training on this for 60 minutes during International Women's Day? I was like, sure, I'd love to. But here's the secret. I did not have a 60-minute training on this. Totally made it up within like the 10 days before I had to do it. Turned out to be really successful. A couple thousand people came, which told me, that response told me that I'd struck a nerve. I'd struck a nerve of something that people really did want additional help with. And we have amazing human resources and people operations resources and opportunities that the company guides us on. But it's still such an individual thing, right? Your career is such an individual thing. No one's ever going to care more about it than you do. So even with these amazing resources we have, the response told me that there was a need for this to be supplemented with ways to just sort of like take life by the horns. And I know that that's something that you get behind too, that type of philosophy or, go after what you want kind of vibe.
Yeah. And so you have this doc with 15 items that were helping people to empower themselves, empower their career. I guess it worked for you. And then now you're sharing this document with these 15 words of wisdom.
Yeah, it worked for me. So here's an example because people love the practical stuff. I'll give you one macro and one micro. So a macro one is every touch point matters in career search. So I could just show up for my interview for my role, my potential next future role at Google. I could do that, but I could also email the hiring manager beforehand, perhaps put together one slide of what a 30, 60, 90-day plan might look like. Am I going to get that plan perfectly right? Absolutely not. But it's going to show that I've done my research. I can synthesize my ideas quickly in one sheet. It shows that I'm in it to win it, that I'm trying to set myself apart from other candidates. And it's a really good leading indicator of how hard I would work if I were to get that role. So that's kind of one macro idea that really is about setting yourself apart from the rest of the pack. And then a micro idea that was in this 15 bullet doc was notice the eye flick of the interviewer to the upper right or lower left corner when you're in the interview. What does that mean? Your interviewer is probably checking the time. That's your signal to wrap up that answer and move on to let the interviewer move on to the next question. So just being in tune with the body language of your interviewer, picking up on their cues, tightening your answers. We can talk a little bit about that too. Those are two examples from that 15 bullet doc.
Wow. I feel like I'm not going to be able to look at the clock at all here because you're going to read me like a book when it's time to wind down the podcast. So I'll have to put my phone right here so that you can't even see that I'm flicking my eyes.
You found the hack around my hack.
Yeah. So that's a great one. Like read the room, whether it's an interview or whether you're talking to anybody. I've seen my wife like start to use her phone in front of me. I was like, I think I probably lost her attention when she's doing that. What other tips and tricks? You don't have to share all 15, but that one was a great one. That was what we call on the podcast a SYCK career tip. What else is on that doc that either you use today or people commonly leverage and they're like, holy cow, this is simple, but I never thought of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So many of the things that work in an interview also work in a career development conversation with your manager, in an initial conversation with a mentor or a sponsor. And we can talk a little bit about how I distinguish those two and how others do as well. One that I like to share is just the power of the pause. People think that when they're having a career development conversation with their manager or they're in an interview, that if they pause, that they're going to sound stupid or uncertain of the answer or insecure. But really, when you pause, or you have a pregnant pause, just like those, it kind of keeps the other party hanging on your words. It makes them look up at you from the notes they're taking. It makes you sound more confident, more competent, and more secure in what you're saying. So I find that embracing the power of the pause is one of those difficult to implement, but super powerful SYCK tricks that takes practice, but when practiced can just be incredibly effective.
Nice. And I learned something similar when I was in business school. They recorded us for mock interviews, and watching the recording, I realized how many ums and likes I was saying, filler words. And they taught me with my $138,000 investment, with my education, one of the great things that I learned from them was to pause and not to do those long pauses like you do, because even when you were doing that right now, it was kind of making me feel uncomfortable, but it was keeping me engaged. I was like, what is she saying there? But I learned to use a pause. I still don't do it perfectly, but people don't know how slow you're talking. You always are putting more pressure on yourself to always be filling in the gaps, and you don't really need to.
Right. And what it does is it gives your brain a chance to catch up. And we tend to ramble, right? We tend to ramble if we're nervous. I mean, the more nervous we are, the more we tend to ramble. There's all sorts of things going on in our bodies when we're nervous. We've got cortisol, adrenaline running through our bodies. Our pupils are dilated. We've got blood rushing to our extremities. So it's almost like our bodies get put in this fight or flight state. And our amygdalas are hijacked. Basically, the amygdala, the part of our brain that is responsible for fight or flight, is not able to differentiate between a real threat, the tiger bounding around the corner, versus a perceived threat. The perceived threat is, will this mentor want to take me on as a mentee? Is my manager judging me right now? Am I going to get this job? So the amygdala is equally hijacked in a perceived threat, like those career situations, versus a real threat where, in primitive times, our actual life was at stake. And that disables our prefrontal cortex from being able to make rational decisions. But when you pause, when you take a deep breath, you can actually re-engage that prefrontal cortex to make better decisions. And what happens when you make better decisions? Well, the filler words go away, your answers are better, you're better able to recall that data point that you wanted to convey in that interview, career conversation, mentorship conversation, chat with your colleague, etc.
This sounds like a lot of my psych classes. Thinking back in the days when I was a psych major going for my PhD in psychology. Do you have a psych background as well, or did you just geek out on this sort of stuff?
The latter. I geek out on this sort of stuff. There are so many social psychological principles that I love, and I only dabbled in it a little bit in college. I studied economics, so I love the number stuff. I geek out on economics principles too. Just talk to me about sunk costs. We could spend the rest of the time talking about that, or luxury pricing. But I love the social psychology principles too. I just have a natural interest in that.
Nice. I generally advise people of the 2-year rule. Every 2 years, you should be going up, like getting promoted or getting higher scope of role, over getting some regional expertise, functional expertise, just stretching yourself. Or if you're not getting that, get out of the organization. I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile and you had 8 roles in 16 and a half years. You're doing that 2-year rule. I don't know if you consciously did it or not, but you've had lots of mobility across your career from teams, from locations, and so forth. I'd love for you to share how you've thought about your career and how you've managed to have all these opportunities to grow your career over the 16 plus years at this one great company. It looks like, at least on your LinkedIn profile, you grew quite tremendously over the decade and a half.
It's interesting you parsed the data here. There's a reactive element to this and there's a proactive element to this. Some of it's been proactive. I just talked about my move from the New York sales team to the Boulder technical team. I can talk about a big mistake I made in that move if it might be useful to your listeners. And I also have had a lot of things that have been reactive, right? Big companies tend to reorg a decent amount. And I think some of my learnings have been in how I react to those reorgs. And actually wrote a piece for Entrepreneur Magazine around how do you thrive in a reorg, not just survive? Because I would say a good half of those 8 roles that you just talked about were the result of reorgs. And I've had some where I really felt crummy and felt like I got the short end of the stick. And there was one where I loved my team that I was working on certain education products with. And then I was told that I was the only one moving to a new team in Chicago. And I was super bummed out. I mean, these were really, really good friends of mine. So much of where we all derive our happiness in our careers is from the people with whom we work. And I just worked with this really solid group of people who I didn't want to say goodbye to. And even though I felt not so great about this reorg, I realized that I just had to lean in and volunteer to be a leader through that reorg as opposed to a disgruntled recipient of the reorg. So even though every fiber in my being was saying, fight back and argue with why this doesn't make any sense and complain about how frustrated I am that now I have to be on this team in Chicago working remotely from New York. Instead, I realized that that wasn't going to serve me well. It wasn't going to serve the team well. And even though those are the things I felt in the pit of my stomach, the choices I made on the outside, the public choices I made were, okay, well, I'm an expert in XYZ product. This new team in Chicago knows nothing about this product. I'm going to set up weekly sessions to train them on this product for 90 minutes every Tuesday. And I'm going to volunteer when they say, okay, well, we've got this new culture we need to build. Who can help us lead the culture pillar on this new team? I'm going to raise my hand and say, you know what? I'd love to do that. Not only was it good for the company, not only was it good for the team, it just made me happier. So this was a lot about finding my own personal opportunities for growth and finding my own glass half full mentality, because I had a choice at that moment. And the choice was be really sad, be unhappy, be disgruntled, or choose to see the growth opportunities that could come out of this maybe imperfect situation that could ultimately set me up for more success. Because of those choices, I do feel like I was able to put myself in a favorable situation that set me up for more long-term career success, even though it was a really hard situation for me at the time.
And you talk a lot about reorgs. And when I moved from American Express to Google, I also was subject to a lot of reorgs. In my pre-Google life, reorgs were a euphemism for people getting laid off. We did American Express to save costs. We did it like a craft when I was working there, that people would talk about reorgs and they're laying off people. You've been at Google, I think, most of your entire career, essentially.
I did research at Harvard Business School for 3 years before that, and then I've been at Google since.
Right. So reorgs at Google and at Facebook and Salesforce often brought opportunity. They kind of like shuffle the chairs on the deck, and sometimes you get a good seat overlooking the ocean, and sometimes you get an inner one in front of the kiddie pool. But you always had a job. At least that's what I found. And in each of these reorgs that you went through, it sounds like you had a job, but they moved your cheese sometimes. And some of those worked in your favor, some did not work in your favor.
Yeah, and I'm going to see your deck chair analogy and raise it a step here, because you're right. Sometimes you do get, your deck chair does get placed in the inner place, and you just want to read quietly and you want that view at the edge of the deck, looking at the ocean. Well, here's the thing. None of these deck chairs are bolted to the ground.
That's a good point.
If the company's going to rearrange the deck chairs, you can certainly think about ways that you pick your deck chair up, and maybe the next week you move it a little closer to the ocean. And then the next week you nudge it a little to the left in between these two people, and maybe those other two people on their deck chairs are really good people for you to get to know. And then the next week, just a little bit further to the edge. And what it does is, when there is any kind of change in life, it gives you an opportunity to reevaluate what you want. If you're resting on your laurels, it lights a bit of a fire to think about, well, what growth do you want? What next role do you want? Are you happy with where you are right now? And maybe the answer is yes, maybe the answer is no. But any kind of change that happens to you is an opportunity for you to influence the transition you want to have. My good friend Jason Pfeiffer, he just wrote a great book called Build for Tomorrow. And he's all about how change is an opportunity. There are these 4 stages of change you go through: panic, adaptation, new normal, and then ultimately wouldn't go back. And so maybe your deck chair gets placed someplace where you're not that thrilled about at first, but then once you get your deck chair to the place you want it to be, you think, wow, I would never go back to where my deck chair was last year before this reorg happened.
Right. And you've stayed at Google, and there have been some times when you might have been in a bad deck chair and you started to move it a little bit into the better location. What did you do besides actually lifting a deck chair up? How did you do this? And you alluded to this a little bit earlier before about mentors and sponsors. I don't know if that came in to help you out there, but how did you move when you were put in a chair that wasn't so special?
There's just an enormous emphasis for me in my growth in 2 areas. What tools and skills am I learning, number 1, and what people do I have in my board of advisors supporting? So let's talk about the growth. What tools and skills am I learning? I was meeting with a mentor myself, and I was having this wonderful conversation with this senior executive at Google, and she was giving me some guidance on a project. And then we kind of went into overall career development advice that she had for me. And she said, oh, Jenny, and one more thing, follow growth. And then we both had to run to other meetings.
Yeah.
So it was like, follow growth, mic drop. And I was like, off the call, I was like, what is that? I was like, is that revenue growth? Is it headcount growth? Is it skills growth? And then I realized I can interpret it however I want to. So I did some deep thinking and listened to, okay, well, what is my gut telling me right now? What kind of growth do I need right now? And to me, it was all about skill and learning growth, development growth around what capabilities do I have? What capacities do I have? What leadership tools do I have in my tool belt? And what can I add to that? Because, you get a promotion, you forget about it the next week. You get more money. Okay, that's great. No one's going to complain about more money. But if you get more money, but you're miserable and bored and you've got a bore out, not a burnout, then is that really what we're aiming for? I am always trying to optimize for my own happiness and fulfillment. And that comes from learning new things, a better way to lead a team meeting by listening more and talking less, or a new leadership skill or development area around how do I manage multiple stakeholders on this project and figure out the roles and responsibilities when two of my managers who report to me are doing kind of similar things on a project, right? How do I develop that skill to give more clarity? How do I delegate better or give more clear deadlines rather than saying, okay, this is due end of next week? Well, is it due Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern time? Or is it due Friday, end of next week at midnight Pacific time, right? How do I give more clarity to my team? So as I realized I had the opportunity to interpret this follow growth mic drop sentence at the end of this mentorship meeting where someone was advising me, I realized that skill growth, capacity growth, capability growth is where I've always been the most fulfilled, because that's the stuff that has staying power as opposed to a promotion, a raise that can tend to be a little bit more temporary. So that's number one. And number two, it was that your network and your people that you meet, your tribe of supporters, is the other thing that a reorg can really ignite. So the reorg, or the deck chair shuffling, can certainly give you opportunities to learn new skills. Like I mentioned with that new team in Chicago, I was teaching them one product. They, of course, then in turn taught me their product expertise. But I think almost more important than that is it's easy for us to put networking on the bottom of our to-do list on any given week because it's never urgent, it's never time sensitive, it's just this muscle we want to build always on. When a reorg happens, it is a forcing function to reevaluate your relationships, to reach out to new people. So if for a year I have meet Robert on my to-do list because, I should really get to know Robert, each week that passes, it's easier to just put lower and lower on my to-do list, meet Robert. But then when the reorg happens or the deck chair shuffling happens, everyone's starting from scratch. So it's a perfect time to be like, hey, Robert, I'd love to collaborate and I'd love to get to know you better now that our worlds are slightly more aligned or whatever it is. Or now that our worlds aren't aligned anymore, I'd love to finally have that one-on-one and say goodbye because, I always regretted not getting to know you better. People say like your network is your net worth. And I think that's such a smart line because that's how you're going to get the vast majority of your opportunities, your projects, your teams, your full-time roles, your friendships when you move to a new city in life in general.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer of that. And that's how I got 24 out of my 29 jobs. Someone put in a good word and said, hey, you should speak to Alan. Didn't mean I didn't need to interview for it, but at least got me under consideration. When I got reorged sometimes to get your bearing, to build those relationships. And it just randomly puts you in a group of new people, which I think leads to some very serendipitous encounters, sometimes bad ones. But even the bad ones you learn from, you're like, okay, I'm not going to be put in this situation again.
Right. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your book. So you've had an amazing career at Google. What do you want to share with the public in this book? Like, I don't really know much about it. We spoke briefly here, and rather than me guess, please share what you're going to share with the world. And if you want to share when it's coming out or any other information about the book, I would love to hear because I'm a big audiobook fan. As soon as it comes out in audio, I'm going to get my copy.
Well, it's definitely going to come out on audio. I intend to read the book for audio. So thank you in advance for listening. The book is really about how do you achieve your goals in life overall. We've talked a lot about career. Obviously, you have Kadima careers. You're very focused on your career, and we have a similar philosophy around taking ownership over your career. But that's just one element of life. And there are all these other areas where people sit idly by waiting for life to happen to them. And you can do that. That's an option. But if you want to make things happen at work, in relationships, in friendships, in achieving your goals overall, you do have to advocate for yourself, ask for what you want. So it's really about how do you get the life you really want, uninhibited, unconventionally, unapologetically. If you go to my website, the hero statement on my website is get what you want unapologetically. Mm-hmm. And I believe in that because no one's going to come. If you move to a new city, and I moved to Boulder, Colorado 4.5 years ago, we had small kids. My husband and I were excited to make friends. And if we had just sat, never texting anybody, never going to any community events, never going to the farmer's market with people who invited us, we never would have built the social connections that we've built. You have to ask for it. You have to put yourself out there. Text people and ask if they're interested in getting together with you. Have a game night and invite 6 new couples you've met. So there's just so much that we can take control of in our lives, but sometimes it's intimidating, or we feel like, well, what if people don't like me? We get these like high school kind of feelings of needing to fit in, or feeling intimidated, or feeling even imposter syndrome in social situations. Or it's hard to make friends when I was in my late 30s when I moved here. It's like, how do you meet new friends in your late 30s? So those are the kinds of things that I think are exciting to help people through, because if we just sit around waiting for life to happen to us, the life that happens to us is not going to be the life we want necessarily.
Yeah, I love that. That's some more SYCK advice there. You don't get what you don't ask for. Have there ever been times where you were burned for asking for something? Because a lot of people are fearful. They're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't ask for this, or maybe I don't deserve this, and they don't ask for it. And it seems like you've kind of taken life by its horns. And even the story about how you met your husband, if you want to tell my audience a little bit about that. But tell people the story about how you met your husband, and then tell me, what's the worst thing that ever happened to you, if you don't mind sharing, from asking for something besides getting a no?
Profound question. And I love that you are giving me the opportunity to think through it. Thank you. First, I'll talk about how I met my husband. I was riding the subway home from work one day, and there was a really good looking guy sitting about 30 feet away from me. I'm looking at him and I'm thinking, what's he up to? What's he all about? And just sort of taken by this good looking guy, but it's New York City. There are lots of good looking people. And so I say, all right, if he gets off at my stop, then maybe I'll try to strike up a conversation with him. And if not, then say la vie. I didn't want to make a whole spectacle out of going up and talking to him on a silent train. So as it turns out, he got off at the next stop, 57th Street, Columbus Circle, which was not my stop. So the people got on the train, the doors were about to close, the people exited, the new people got on, the doors were about to close. And even though I initially thought, okay, that's the universe telling me it wasn't meant to be, I said, no, forget the universe. And I ran off that train. Nervously, I tried to catch up with him. It was a blizzard, so I had my big puffy coat on. Hair was all disheveled under my winter hat. And I said, excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you. And he said, that's okay. You seem nice. And I said, well, you were on my train and I thought you were cute. Any chance I could give you my business card? And this is so wild because I had just turned 30 at the time. So I was really conscious of getting older. And as, a woman, I was thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to find this person I want to be with? And I was also very conscious of who's married, who's not married. And so I also said, you're wearing gloves, so I can't tell if you're wearing a wedding ring. But in the event that you're not married, you were on my subway and I thought you were cute. Any chance I could give you my business card? Which, looking back on it, is absurd, Alan, that my opening line had to do with marriage. But in the moment, it was just open mouth words, come flying out with no real plan in place. That's when I didn't pause like we were just talking about. But ultimately, we did go out. We are now married almost 10 years and have these 2 nutty little kids. But the lesson here to me is you can sit idly by and you can let life happen to you, or you can go after what you want, even if it feels like you're being a bit much. I think I'm a little extra. And I didn't even know what that word meant until someone said it to me about 2 years ago. And they're like, Jenny, you're a little extra. And I said, is that a good thing or a bad thing? They said, it depends on the context. I was like, great. Well, then I'll interpret it as a good thing.
That's a great story. I don't know if you were able to think of a story, and I could let you off the hook if you want. But my hypothesis is there hasn't been any meaningful situation where you asked for something and the ramifications were so bad, or maybe even so memorable. Because I think people overestimate the downside risk of asking for something, which prevents them from going out the door and asking your husband or your husband to be for that. If it didn't happen, you may not even remember the story, so it wouldn't be that big of a deal.
You are very wise in how you're characterizing that, because people can have a negativity bias when it comes to a performance review and you're given 3 great things and then 1 thing to focus on. And people tend to have a negativity bias. They go home that day, they talk to their partner and they're like, my manager said I'm not good at blah, 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 when they totally gloss over those 3 amazing things that their manager also said. So I think there can be a negativity bias there. But I think there is this almost positivity bias I've always lived with of asking for what I want I get it. And then I remember those points because it's not that I can't remember times that I failed, and I'll share one with you right now, but it's more just like, okay, so the person said no. I mean, let's take dating, for example. Let's take all the times I was interested in somebody and they weren't interested in me. That is a form of putting yourself out there, going on a first date and you wanting to go on a second date and the guy not wanting to go on the second date. That is putting yourself out there. Maybe in many cases, probably, I even texted and said, "Hey, I'd love to go out again." And the response was not positive. So all of those putting myself out there moments, however, set me up to take the risk to chase John off the subway. So there's this line, I think it might have been Nelson Mandela, you don't win or lose, you win or learn. And so maybe all of those no's, those rejections are the seasoning of what builds some stamina to continue to ask, because eventually it's a numbers game. Someone's going to say yes. And if you think of failure as data, then there's really not much to lose. I also love this line, no is a nice opening offer.
That's great. I like that. And
So if this is great for sales, right? Like if you cold call someone and they're like, sorry, not interested. Well, at least they responded to you and then you can work from there.
yeah, no, that's great. And it works with spouses. It also works with a job search. So people are often afraid to get rejected from applying for a job, and it feels a little painful at the time. They might get ghosted, they might get rejected, but who cares? Last time I was applying for jobs, I applied to 300 roles. I got 47 interviews. I only got 5 offers. So that means 295 out of those 300 shots got rejected. I don't remember too many of them. Some of them I remember because it was really horrible, like to 2 or 3 of them, but most of them I have no recollection of.
Sure. And you could also reframe that as a 500% success rate. You needed
Yeah,
one job, you got 5. That is 500%
good
success
point.
of what you needed to get a job. So it's all about the perspective. And I don't want to undermine the pain of rejection, the pain of a job you deeply want and spent, 45 hours prepping for. That is real.
Mhm.
And it is visceral. And sometimes when it's a surprising rejection, you can downright feel like you've had the wind knocked out of you. I actually have a decent amount of anxiety and lose sleep over a lot of things that maybe other people wouldn't. So I don't want to act like there's no pain of rejection and that, like, oh, toxic positivity, only focus on the good things. You got 5 jobs, like, you only needed one. But I do fundamentally feel that you miss 100% of shots on goal
Don't
you
take.
don't take.
Yep.
So the more shots we take, the more the numbers game plays out in our favor.
Yep. That's a great line to end on. So I have 2 final questions. You've given lots of great advice here. If you want to leave my listeners with one more sick piece of career advice, what would it be?
Say yes to the big and no to the small. So when there's a big failure or you feel that pit in your stomach, honor that, feel it, and sit with it as much as you need to work through it. So say yes to that feeling, but say no to all the little rejections, the people who you want to go on a second date with who aren't interested in you. Say no to your body and your brain to spend mental energy on the minor typos in your emails or the little teeny tiny pieces of constructive feedback that a colleague gives you that you just think doesn't serve you well. So say yes to the big failures and feel them in your stomach and honor them, but say no to those little minor things that can kind of scratch
Yeah,
at you each day so that you don't feel overwhelmed with negativity.
that's great advice. And my last question for you, Jenny, is how can people find you, follow you, reach out to you, learn about your book that's coming out? How can people follow all your great wisdom?
I have a biweekly newsletter at itsjennywood.com/newsletter, itsjennywood.com/newsletter. So you can sign up for it there. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. You can search Jenny Wood. The newsletter is a super short, under 2-minute read, helps you achieve goals in all areas of your life.
Great, Jenny. Well, thank you for sharing some of your wisdom with me. I know we have lots of mutual friends in common that we didn't get to talk about here, but next time you're in New York, invite me up to Google. I'll come there for Thursday happy hour. I miss those, if they still have them post COVID. It was great talking to you, great learning from you, and I'm looking forward to putting your audiobook in my queue as soon as I can.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And thank you to everyone listening for giving us the opportunity to contribute to your goals. You could be anywhere right now doing anything, and you've decided to spend your time with us, and you've made it this far to the end. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for listening.
Thanks, Jenny.
That wraps up another remarkable episode of the SYCK Career Podcast with Alan Stein. Check out past episodes and other resources on the website. That's syckpodcast.com, and it's SYCK. Alan, tell the audience about the newsletter they can sign up for.
The newsletter rocks. Check out the accelerator, XLR8R. You will get great tips about your career. You'll get honest insights. You'll get the occasional pet picture, and you will learn how to take proactive control and take charge of your career.
Very good. Very good. That's syckpodcast.com, SYCK. For your host, Alan Stein, I'm Russ Reba, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode. You are going to love the next one.